All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll just do that. And boom. Awesome. All righty. Welcome, everyone. Where we're going to be kicking off today is on page 44. Oh, and Paige, I'm an alcoholic. I think I got so distracted by like, oh, I got to hit the mute all button and all the things. I know I'll keep coming back. Paige, alcoholic. I hope you do too. So where we're kicking off is chapter 4. And the title of the chapter is We Agnostics. And I really want to pause and kind of dive in to the title of this chapter. Because you'll notice we have chapters later in the book that are titled Two Employers, Two Wives. That's T-O, not T-W-O. Everyone's like, oh, 2 wives? Nobody's like T-W-O, 2 employers. We're not excited about that. But the T-O, right? But it doesn't say to the agnostic. The chapter is We Agnostics. And the reason is when all of us come to the second step, we experience a level of agnosticism, whether we think so or not. Bear with me with this. Because in our modern sort of language, we define certain words in a certain context. So for example, an agnostic in today's 2025 language would be sort of like a bit of a fence sitter. Somebody that's like, maybe there's a power, maybe there's not. You know, there could be or there couldn't be. And interestingly enough, in our modern language, those who would be an atheist would be people who have faith that there is no God. It is interesting that in our modern description of these words, to be an atheist actually requires more faith than a modern agnostic. But some of you guys know that I love my etymology. Etymology is the study of words. Entomology is the study of bugs. So it's etymology that I enjoy. I'm not bothered by the other one either, though. I'm pretty easygoing. So let's have a look at what the original meaning of the word agnostic meant. So it is Greek in origin. And eg means without, and gnosis means knowledge. But I want to point something out. The gnosis we're talking about is not that good old alcoholic. Yeah, I know. And I know that you guys would never, ever, ever say this to a sponsor of yours. That, yeah, I know. Especially when they're giving you the same suggestion over and over again. Yeah, Paige, I know. Like, none of us relate to that. But that's not what we're talking about, gnosis. The knowing is deeper than a head level knowing. The knowing that they're talking about in the gnosis is a heart level experiential knowing. For example, often I joke about the history husbands, Howard and Gary and Rob. And I know them. I'm like, hey guys, but their wives know them. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a difference between knowing and heart level knowing. Now, when each and every one of us approaches the second step, especially for the first time, we all experience agnosticism. Now, when we talk about that, it is that without knowing. We might come with belief, we might come with faith, we might come with certain ideas about this power, but we don't have that experiential heart level knowing. And that's what we're after. We're after an experience. That's what we need in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we don't have that. And we cannot be expected to have that at the second step. Now, I'm going to go on this etymological train. Choo-choo. Off we go for a little bit. And so in step 11, we seek to improve our conscious contact with God. And the word conscious, its etymological origin is Latin. So it's a completely different language system. But con means with, and shus or sire means knowing. So at the second step, and that's what chapter 4, We Agnostics, is all about. We're diving in to the second step. So at step 2, each and every one of us approaching the second step, we don't have that knowing experience of God. But in step 11, when we seek to improve that with knowing, so what happens between 2 and 11? Well, a bunch of steps. We got to do 3, 4 through 9, keep it rocking and rolling with step 10. But the real thrust of what we're trying to do is build that with knowing experience of God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe. That's what we're after. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, we spoke a number of weeks ago about the chapter, There is a Solution. And in it, we spoke about how Dr. Carl Jung gave the gentleman Roland Hazard knowledge of what our solution is. And our solution is a spiritual awakening. And just to tie this all together, there's this well-known, famous BBC interview where they interviewed Dr. Carl Jung. And in that interview, they asked him, and they said, growing up, did you believe in God? And he says, yeah, growing up, I believed in God. And then they said, do you believe in God now? And he says, no. There's a bit of a pause. And he goes on to say, I've got no need for belief. And there's a pause. And then he says, I know. And that is what I'm after. I'm not after belief. I'm not even after faith. I'm after that knowing of this power. Now, if you're new to AA, or you're new, or you're like not jazzercised about this whole deal, like, oh no, she's a little God heavy, I hear you. And the whole point of this chapter is to point out that for people like us, the barrier to the second step is far smaller than we think it is. I was joking with Kevin before the meeting about, I showed him my wheelchair, and I always point out the second step is gotta be wheelchair accessible. So don't you worry, we can get over that bump. It's all good. So that's what this chapter is. It's making this concept, this idea of this power accessible to each and every one of us. So the first paragraph of page 44. Now, if you're working with somebody who's not sure if they're an alcoholic, or they don't know what alcoholism is, or they're wanting to diagnose themselves, or you're sitting there like, oh, let me diagnose you. Not that we would ever judge other people, but this is the perfect paragraph to go to. So it says, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. Goodness gracious, I hope so. We're already in chapter 4 and we had the doctor's opinion. You know what I mean? I hope we did. And it says, we hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And this is the distinction. This is what it means to be an alcoholic. And man, this first paragraph in the chapter, We Agnostics, it was life-saving for somebody like me. Because I don't know about you guys, but I came into Alcoholics Anonymous beaten and broken and hopeless and desperately wanting to be a part of, but also nothing like you. And I would hear some silly little jerk natter on, and I'd think, whoa, just like me. And I'd be like, whoa, I'm not as bad as her, Some of you are relating. And then I would hear the very next person share, and I'd think, whoa, I'm way worse than that guy. You know what I would mean? I would look for all the ways I wasn't like you, all the ways I was different, all the ways that this didn't apply to me. And so this, man, and I came in young, and I came in really in trouble and with just buckets of denial. And this made it as simple as it needed to be for somebody like me. And it pegged me between the eyes. And I could not deny who I was or what I was. And I could see the truth. And this is the truth. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. So I can ask myself, when I have honestly wanted to stay sober, have I been able to stop and stay stopped? And what it is asking is, do I have the obsession of the mind? when I've come to AA, when I've gone to rehab, when I've gone to treatment, when I've gotten out of the emergency room, when I've said those, those never again, we come to we agnostics and we're like, oh, prayer, God, I don't like it. I had no problem praying to the porcelain gods at 3 a.m. in that spiritual prayer position where all of the contents of the evening were being spewed all over the place. No problem praying, God help me then, But I come here, I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that. And genuinely, I was like, ooh, I don't know. But when I honestly wanted to, could I stay sober on my own power? And the truth is, if you're hanging out with me on a Wednesday night, probably not. You'd be watching Family Feud and having a good time, You wouldn't be hanging out with us, but I'm glad you're here. This Monty I was staying with, she was watching some Family Feud, so I tied it in. So that is, do I have the mental obsession? And then it says or. So if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or, and I'll be frank with you guys, I'm an and sort of gal. I don't or it around over here, I and. But or, if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take. So what it's asking is, do I have the physical allergy? So once I start to drink, is my experience that I cannot control the amount that I take every single time. It's my experience that more often than not, that thing inside of me switches off and tells me I need more. And the more that I drink, the louder that more gets. Is my experience that once I start, man, I cross lines in the sand I said I would never cross. I do things I never wanted to do. You know what I mean? I embarrass myself. I humiliate myself. Is that my experience? And if I have one or both of those symptoms, it says you are probably alcoholic. Is that my experience? Do you guys know what I'm saying? That once I start, I can't stop. And then once I want to stop, once I want to be done, is it my experience that I haven't been able to do that? That's it. That's alcoholism. And man, the first time I heard that, pegged me between the eyes. It didn't matter that I was young. It didn't matter that my ex drank more than me. I honestly did not think I was an alcoholic because my ex, he was 16 years older than me, and he had been drinking and using drugs the entire 16-year age difference. You can find some daddy issues in there. It's fine. I've done inventory. So he had progressed 16 years before I'd even started. And in that progression, what would happen is if we did not get to the liquor store before when it opened right at 10 in the morning, he would often have a full-blown alcoholic seizure. Now, I was 18 years old. I'm not having alcoholic seizures. I don't have a problem. What's your problem? Do you know what I mean? He just had an 18-year head start on me. I was catching up, though. I turned that into a race and didn't know it. But I thought that was alcoholism. Now, I would also come to meetings and I would hear people talking about their DUIs. Never had a DUI. I never also had a driver's license. Now, the real ones know you don't need a driver's license for a DUI. We'll get one without the other. But I never did. I didn't have any divorces. I wasn't functional enough to actually get married. To get legally married, you need to sign paperwork. And I wasn't able to get functional enough for that. You know what I'm saying? And so I was looking at all the, never been in jail, never got caught. I was looking at all these ways I wasn't like you and all the ways I was different and all the things I thought alcoholism was. But once I started, I couldn't control it. And when I wanted to stay sober, I found that I couldn't. And I was like, oh man, that's me. And then that cracked me open. And then I was able to really see myself in this book and really experience myself in this book. Oh, we're on page 44. We've made it barely anywhere. I'm glad you're here. I promise you missed not much. Page 44, first paragraph. And so that's what it means to be an alcoholic. Physical allergy, mental obsession. That is what differentiates alcoholics from other people. So if I got those things, and it even says or, so I got one or both, probably alcoholic. And then it goes on to say, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. If I have this illness as laid out in this book, there is no other solution for somebody like me. If I'm a hard drinker, if I'm a heavy drinker, if I got some other stuff going on, there might be another answer. I did not find it. And I will let you know, if you're desperate enough to hang out with me on a Wednesday night, you probably didn't either. Thursday morning, hi Scott, and Kevin, because I just realized time zones. Welcome to Thursday mornings. I love it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. In the UK, it'd be after 1 a.m. too. Welcome. Those of you who are up bright and early or staying up late, I'm glad you're here. But the truth is, if I had another option, I probably would have done that. Do you know what I mean? So, only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I learned something recently. I always talk about the illness of alcoholism as an illness because that is how it's laid out in the book. Now, I don't correct anyone if they call alcoholism a disease, because after the book was written, it was considered one by the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association. And we can thank Marty Mann for a lot of that. She did a lot of work to get alcoholism recognized by the medical community. But I refer to it as an illness because it's referred to as an illness. But somebody pointed out to me, well, they didn't point it out to me. They pointed it out, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to Google that and see if that's true, because that's rad as heck. Yeah, illness, disease, syndrome, condition. Well, the difference between an illness and a disease that I learned was an illness is me taking stock of my symptoms. And a disease is diagnosed by somebody else. And that's a subtle difference. But that's what we do here. We diagnose ourselves based on our symptoms. That's what we do. It's not based on the diagnosis of a doctor. In fact, many of us had the diagnosis of a doctor. I think you're an alcoholic, to which we said, I'm not going to listen to you, and did our own thing. Like, we had examples of these, like, where we, lots of, if your experience is like my experience, I had lots of people who were very concerned about my drinking, who were convinced I had a problem. And I'm like, I'm not that bad. I don't have grand mal seizures at 10 a.m. Thank you, I'm good. And they're like, but look at your life. And I'm like, it's fine. You know what I mean? So it's just an interesting thing, because I am the one that needs to diagnose my alcoholism, because I'm the one that needs to be convinced I have it. I've worked with people where I'm like, oh boy, you are alcoholic. And they're like, I don't think it's that bad. I have to be convinced, because I have to see my hopelessness. And it is when I see my hopelessness that I am open and willing to grab a hold of the hope that is on offer. So we continue on in chapter 4, We Agnostics, as we dive into the second step. So it says, to one who feels he is an atheist, again, to be an atheist requires faith. Faith there is no God. Or agnostic, now for our purposes, without knowledge. Such an experience seems impossible. And this is the book meeting us where we're at. Meeting us with this idea of like, I need a spiritual experience, but I don't want one. I don't like it. I don't like the idea of it. And it says, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. What does it mean to be an alcoholic of the hopeless variety? Well, we saw the two symptoms: lack of control, lack of choice, physical allergy, mental obsession. That is all that is required for it to be hopeless. It does not matter how long I was drinking, does not matter the quantity that I was drinking, does not matter the conditions or circumstances. It is those two characteristics. Because if I cannot control the amount that I take, I'm never going to be able to do that. And it's only going to lead me to pain and suffering and humiliation. And if you're like me, degradation and loss of everything worthwhile in life. But I continue to go back to it. And that's what makes this thing hopeless. So, hi, bunch of hopeless drunks. I'm glad you're here. I love you guys. Alrighty. And it says, to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to faith. And we saw this again on page 25, on the very bottom paragraph of page 25. It spoke about how we can go on to the bitter ends, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, or accept spiritual help. And again, what we are reiterating at this point in time is that if I have alcoholism, those are my only two choices. There's no option C. And I kind of come here and I think, like, do we have diet AA or like AA light? Because I think I'm just a little baby alcoholic. You know what? The only time in my life I ever thought I had potential was when it would reference the potential alcoholic. I'm like, that's me. You know, like, oh, I'm not as bad, you know? But if I have this illness, if I have a lack of control and lack of choice, I only have two options. I can die an alcoholic death. And man, I promise you, we think we know. If you're like me, you think you know what an alcoholic death looks like. Looks like, oh, well, drinking into liver cirrhosis. But an alcoholic death also looks like, suicide. It looks like car accidents. It looks like, man, I've gone to funerals of young people who fell off things and brain injured, like brain dead. It looks like staying in domestic violence situations. The alcohol, honestly, it can look like suicide a number of years into sobriety, but being untreated. That is what faces me. Or live on a spiritual basis. And whenever we talk about the word basis, what we can point to as basis of life, way of life. And what it's saying is my two choices, if I have alcoholism, is to go on to the bitter ends, dying of this horrific disease, which will erode the fabric of anything and everything worthwhile in life, which will burn my life to the ground, man. And it's in embers, it's in ashes. You can't even see that there was any structure there, like just destroyed. Or I can work these 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. Those are my two options. Now, if I do not actively and intentionally choose to work these 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does, what that means, I have chosen alcoholic death. If I do not actively choose the solution, I have chosen an alcoholic death. And I'll be honest, I show up here and I'm like, no, but like, could half measures avail us something? Do you know what I mean? Could we have something? Welcome, Sean. We're on page 44. Glad you're here. You know what I mean? Could I get half? I feel like I should at least get half for half measures. You know what I mean? But if I have the illness of alcoholism, those are my only two options. And it is the black and white reality that I find myself in. The irony of things is I walk around the world with a black and white lens and I can't see it. Do you know what I mean? It's like everything's right or wrong, good or bad, all or nothing. That's how I live my life. But it's only when I come to this, as an alcoholic, when I come to this black and white reality, this black and white predicament, and I see that it is black and white. And as a result of that, I grab a hold of the solution. I grab a hold of these 12 steps as a way of life. The world turns into technicolor. You know what I mean? It's like Dorothy as she crosses the threshold into Oz. You know what I mean? I see the world as it really is. And so you might be like, oh girl, it's a little bit black and white. It's like, it is. But if I accept that, man, the world becomes a beautiful place. But it's not a beautiful place at that point. That is like, oh. And here's what I love. When it says to be doomed an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. The book is not expecting me to be jazzercised. Those are my options. The book is meeting me where I'm at. in my pain, in my suffering, in my shame, in my denial, in my I don't like this, in my resistance, my petulant childishness. You know what I mean? The book is meeting me there. And here is where we're going to see it taking me where I need to go. It says, but it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. So half of the first 180 members were originally atheist or agnostic. Half of the original 100 members, 80, were struggled with the idea of God. So that's 40 if we're rigorously honest, and 50 if we're leaning into some exaggeration. And often we think this idea of struggling with a conception of a power greater than ourselves, it's a new phenomenon in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a new struggle. It's like, oh, the world has advanced so much further than then. No, half of the first 100 members, the struggle with the conception of a power greater than ourselves is nothing new. This is not a new issue. And the book can help us overcome. The direction in this book, lined up with our own experience, can help us overcome this barrier, which I promise is wheelchair accessible. So it says, again, the book meeting us where we're at. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we're not true alcoholics. Hoping I got the, diet alcoholism, can I get the gluten-free AA? If you have celiac, don't you worry, the 12 steps are gluten-free. You're good to go. But I'm looking for the easier, softer way. I'm hoping because the truth is I see the steps on the wall and I'm absolutely terrified. I can't admit to you that I'm terrified of step 5. I can't admit to you that I'm terrified of step 9. I can't admit to you all the things that I think about any step that has any mention to God. I'm not able to be honest with you. And so it says, at first some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope that we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must. I'm going to emphasize must. Getting a little musty in here, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's like, oh, there's no musts. I'm like, there's one of many. It's musty. We got some musts all over the place. And it says, must find a spiritual basis of life. And again, way of life. And that's what these 12 steps are. They're not an idea of God. They are a way in which I live my life. And it says, or else. Girl, did the big one just threaten me? It said, or else. That's not nice. But that is the reality. I need to find a spiritual way in which I live my life, or I am doomed to experience my step 1 experience, which is that I will drink again. Nothing less than a spiritual awakening. And I will drink again. And when I understand step 1 is I'm going to drink again, oh boy, that drives me into at least a little crack of openness, because I gotta find something. And it says, but perhaps it's gonna be that way with you. Hey, perhaps you're as hopeless as we were. And I just love, because it's hey, we were in trouble and you might be too. Glad you're here. That's the vibe that I get with it. And I love this, the book meeting us where we're at. But cheer up. Something like half of us. So again, we're reiterating in the same paragraph, half of us thought we were atheist or agnostic. So again, this is not, that idea of oh, people don't believe in God, or it's such a big barrier. Man, it's nothing new. And it says our experience shows us that you need not be disconcerted. So what I love is experience trumps belief. Experience is more powerful than thoughts and ideas. And our experience is that if you're willing to take this course of action, it does not matter what you think or what you believe, and I mean this with love, or what you feel. Which is not to say we're disregarding your feelings. But I will stay trapped in myself, and I will stay trapped in a hopeless condition based on what I think or what I feel or what I believe. But I can get freedom based on the actions that I take. And it is actions that always breed experience. So my actions lead to experience. So it says, if a mere code of morals, and a code of morals is just a series of rules, like the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Like don't steal from people. Don't have affairs. Don't drink. Go to meetings. Those are a code of morals, a set of rules. And it says, or a better philosophy of life. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not being derogatory, but a better code of life would be something like the 4 agreements. You know what I mean? Like it's this beautiful code, a beautiful way to live life. But on my own power, I'm not able to not take things personally. My word? I don't know how to be impeccable with that. And I can't remember the other ones. I always remember 2 out of 4. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I can't live up to it. So it says, if a better code of morals or a better philosophy of life was sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So what we're saying is beliefs and ideas are not enough to keep me sober. Rules, conditions, not enough to keep me sober. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. And man, I tried. I always wanted to be a good person. There was a type of person that I wanted to be, and I could not get there. I could not do it, and I wanted to. And it said, we could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. I could wish to be a good person. I could want to be a good person. I didn't do a whole lot of reading self-help books or that sort of thing at that time in my life, but I had a lot of people that gave me a lot of self-help books because they thought I needed it. I don't know why. Everything was going great behind the dumpster. But man, there was a type of person I wanted to be, and I just could not do it. The needed power wasn't there. Now, Cynthia, this is something I got from Bill, so you let him know that I gave him credit. See, the thing is, there is not power in the idea. See, I will turn to an idea, but there is no power in an idea. The power wasn't there. Where is the power? The power is in the experience. I cannot stay sober over a belief, over an idea, and over a set of rules or just written, like the 12 steps as written on the wall, or even read out of this book is simply an idea. And if all I do is read it, man, there is no power. But if I follow the directions and I take the actions that builds an experience, don't worry, it's all okay. No, it's okay. That's where the power is. In the experience. And I get that experience by taking actions. And it says our human resources as marshaled. To be marshaled is to be led by the will were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So my human power, my human resources, I'm leading. All my willpower, all my might, I'm leading it. And it's not enough. And we can hold our experience up to this light. Is that my experience? Well, my experience is I would use all my resources, all my willpower, and I could not stay sober. But it also, and we're going to talk about this, not this week because I don't go quickly, but we're going to talk about this in coming weeks. That my human resources, my human power, my willpower that I do have a considerable amount of willpower. I do have willpower. But that willpower was not powerful enough to keep me sober. It also was not powerful enough to free me from suicidal ideation. It wasn't powerful enough for me to show up to life in the way that I wanted to be. It wasn't powerful enough to overcome my resentments, my fears, my guilt, my shame. There was no power there. And I've got willpower, man. I do. I had a friend that would always be like, Paige, you're so stubborn. And I'm like, no, I'm not stubborn. Give me exact, precise examples of which I've been stubborn so I can refute them. But I'm not stubborn. You know what I mean? Like I have, man, and I got like a high spiritual pain tolerance. I can go through some pain, which is not a blessing, by the way. It's a bit of a curse because the higher pain tolerance we have, the more we'll live in that misery and not take spiritual action. There are those who are blessed with a low pain tolerance because it forces them to take action. But what I will say is, man, there is some physical pain and some emotional pain that I can and there is some stuff where my willpower works, but it does not work in me being able to stay sober, to stay not suicidal. That's my experience. And to show up to life, to be the person that I truly wanted to be. They failed utterly. Is that my experience? And it says, lack of power. That was our dilemma. I need power. I didn't have the power to stay sober, and I did not have the power to stay content. And those are two things. I did not have that power. And it says we had to find a power by which we could live. This needs to be a way of life, not an idea, not a thing that I do for 30 days or 60 days. This needs to, and I can work the steps very quickly. I can work them in 60 days or 30 days. Absolutely. But I need to continue as a way of life. I need to find a power by which I could live. And it had to be, and we'll notice that this is in italics. It says it had to be a power greater than ourselves. And that italics points to the importance, welcome, or on page 45, that this is an important line. I needed a power that was going to be more powerful than me because I did not have the power. And it also implies I need a power that is more powerful than my alcoholism. And it says, obviously. Keep in mind, it wasn't obvious to me. I mean, it follows that if I am powerless, I need power, but it wasn't obvious when I got here. I'm like, why do I need a God thing? Like, what's all that about? Like, you know, meow. The cat was saying, I get it. And so it says, but where and how were we to find this capital P power? And one of the things I want to point out, and I'm going to continue to point out, especially in this chapter, all of the capitalizations. Because almost any, not every, but almost any word that I see capitalized, what that is a synonym for God. And a synonym is a different word that has the same meaning. So if you are somebody that does not like that word God, you don't have to use that word. You can use whatever word that you want, but we can also use any of the words that have capitalizations like power, because we're pointing to the same thing. And I also want to point something out. God is a title. That's what we're pointing to. The idea of God being a title. Because if we look at our lives, are there many things, or job description? God is a title or a job description. And I can look at all the things in my life that I have put in the position of God. I'm sure none of you guys know what I'm talking about when I'm like other people. Have I give other people the title of God? Now, I didn't sign it, but how I orientated to myself was a clear indication that I had made them God. Alcohol was a god in my life. I didn't literally worship the bottle, but did my actions not tell you something? You know what I mean? Did I not turn to that bottle for everything that I now turn to God for? Did I worship at the altar of power, prestige, success, validation, approval, attention, affection? Have I worshiped at those altars? See, God is a title. God is a job description. And I have often put a lot of things in that role of God. And what I need to do is I need to find an experience with this power. So, where and how were we to find this capital P power? And so anything that's capitalized I can use. And it says, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Exactly what this book is about. Its main object. So the main purpose of this book is to enable you to find a capital P power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So the whole point of this book is to take a silly little hopeless drunk like me so that I can build a relationship with power. And I'm big on this. I'm not big on like acquisition of power or it's all about power. For me, it's about a relationship with power because it's something that I've got to build. I actually do this whole talk about how the spiritual, like the steps in the spiritual journey, as if it's like through Tinder. Do you know what I mean? And at step 2, all I'm doing is just believing that I'm not being catfished spiritually. Do you know what I mean? I'm just gonna, I don't know which way you swipe. I'm gonna assume it's swipe right to say yes. We don't even have to super like, if they still got the super like on Tinder. We don't even have to super like this higher power. We just got to believe there could be one swipe. But then what happens is I take some action. I do a 4th step. I start to pray. I start to meditate. And that's a little like going on that first date. Now, I know we're people that don't go on dates. What's the joke? How do you tell an alcoholics on a second date? They got their 2 garbage bags full of stuff in the driveway. Ta-da! You know, that's how you know. I mean, some of you might have dated. I'm just telling you how I showed up. And sometimes it wasn't even 2. I was missing a garbage bag. I don't know where it went. Like a lady, you know. And so that's how I would show up. But the idea is like on a date is you get to know each other. And at first it feels, I'm sure, awkward and uncomfortable. And it feels like a little like, ooh. But not over time, but over consistency. Consistency with spending time together, talking with each other, listening, those are married, listening to each other, having experiences together. That same person that we barely swiped on, that we just went on one date and was so uncomfortable with that consistency, that becomes that person that you want to share everything with. You have an awful day at work and you can't wait to tell your partner. You have a wonderful day and you're so excited to share. Your partner goes and experiences something and you can't wait to hear about it. Like that. That's what gets to be built. But it gets built with consistency of action. And so that's the view I have of the spiritual journey. A little like dating, a little like Tinder. Not like Tinder. Don't, if your sponsor's telling you stay off Tinder, don't listen. I'm not saying go on. I'm saying do your 4th step. Do that. Alrighty. So the whole point of this book, the whole point is to enable me to build this relationship with power, to connect to this power, to lead me to the spiritual awakening. Sometimes when people are like, I don't know about if I like the spiritual part of the program, I'm like, what's the other part? What's the non-spiritual part of the program? Like, where's that? Is that the coffee? Is that why the coffee creamer won't stir in? Because it's non-spiritual and it's just hanging out at the top? Is that why? Or maybe you guys got fancy creamer at your meetings. That's fine. That's fine. Tell me more about that. And that's the thing too, is that this power will solve my problem. Solve. And that's what it means to be recovered. And that's what we're after. And it says that means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, we're going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics, and this is the book meeting us where we're at, as we're like, oh no, God, don't talk about God, right? The book's like, hey, we see it, our experience is that this leads to difficulty. It says many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention the subject of God. So it's like that idea of there's a fellowship, and that's what that is. Like, you guys get me. You drank the way that, that's why I kept going back to that. You know, that gift of identification. And it's like, and I'm not alone. And you guys have coffee and sometimes donuts. Amazing. You know what I mean? But then, oh no, this is a God thing. You know, that And that was their experience. This is not a new thing. And so, especially when we mention the subject of God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he neatly evaded or entirely ignored. He's like, this doesn't need to apply to me. And again, the book meeting us where we're at. Not expecting me to be perfect, not expecting me to understand and get it right away. It's going to meet us where we're at and take us where we need to go. We know how he feels. We have been there too. We have struggled, and I've struggled when I came here with my old ideas of God, my preconceived notions, you know what I mean? I struggled with it, and I get it. We get it. And it says, we have shared his honest doubt and prejudice, that a doubt that there could be a power and prejudice. Now, when we look at the word prejudice, a definition that is most helpful is to have opinions on that which we have no experience. So I have an opinion, but I don't have experience. So an old belief about something I do not have experience with. To prejudge, to have a judgment before experience. That's what we're talking about. So no. I can't do that God stuff. And so that is some of our experience. To others, the word some of us have been violently anti-religious. Maybe we had a lot of religious trauma. Maybe we've seen a lot of terrible things done in the name of religion. Maybe we've seen pain and suffering and against any sort of institution and that sort of thing. And nope, I'm not interested in that religion or that religion. And it's saying some of us start from there. And it says, to others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Did I have religion shoved down my throat growing up as a child, maybe in school, maybe forced to sit in Sunday school? And maybe that impression of God, and it goes on to say, perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. Maybe the God that was pushed on us felt like a Santa Claus God. Like a bearded guy in the sky who was watching and judging, and if I was good, I'd get presents. If I was bad, I would get coal. And it feels like, no, there's no God, because we imagine the bearded guy in the sky. Now I want to point out, if our starting point is the bearded guy in the sky, that is more than enough to start. We're just looking for the starting blocks. That's what step 2 is. It is the starting blocks of a lifelong race. It is not the finish line. But so many of us have had that, and that resistance and that barrier. And so it says, with that rejection, we had abandoned the God idea entirely. And as we go through this paragraph, we're seeing our legitimate barriers to belief in God, to the belief that there could be a conception. And the book is going to help us overcome them. So we imagine we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a capital P power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. Now, I got sober in my early 20s, and if you're worried about that, don't be. I am a really efficient human being, and I manage my life into unmanageability and hopelessness really efficiently. But when I got here, I was attached to this idea of being cool. Now, never in my life have I ever been cool, and I'm hanging out with you guys in church basements, and all of a sudden, I gotta be cool. You know what I mean? And I would hear people use that G-O-D word, and I'm like, ugh, that's not cool. Do you know what I mean? And I would also hear people use the word God. And I would assume I knew what they meant when they used that word. Now, I wasn't going to talk to them. That was completely out of the question. I wasn't going to ask any sort of follow-up questions because that would mean having a conversation, and I was going to leave the meeting as soon as possible so that nobody could corner me and ask me a question that I didn't have the answer to. Like, how's it going? Do you know what I mean? Ooh, the baffling, you got me with that, puzzle. And so when I started out, I started using the word higher power because that's what the cool kids were doing. And I wanted to be a cool kid. Never been. Don't know what that's like. But I started to use higher power simply because it was cool. But I realized quite quickly that's 2 words. It's a lot of syllables. And being an efficient alcoholic, That's too much work. So simply out of efficiency, I began to use that word God. I began to use that word God as I prayed, as I meditated, as I began to work these steps as a way of life. And the most incredible thing happened. Now I'm spoiling the end for you guys. But the most incredible thing happened as I began to have an experience with this power. That word no longer began to mean what I thought you meant when you used it. That word began to mean what I had experienced as the result of this course of action, as the result of the 12 steps. And so when I use that word God, and I use it a lot, what I mean for me is the conception of a power greater than myself that I've experienced as the result of the 12 steps. But if you're hearing that word, what I mean is the conception of a power greater than yourself that you are the most open to. That's what I mean. And we grow from there because I'm after an experience. So it goes on to say, like cool, weak, cowardly, uncool, like lame, but we can overcome that barrier. It says we looked upon this world of warring individuals and warring theological systems and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. So what it's talking about, the warring theological systems, these different groups that are going to war over religious differences. That's what it's saying. And when it's talking about inexplicable calamity, a modern word for calamity might be trauma. A modern word for calamity might be indescribable suffering. You know, we turn on the news and you see this pain and this suffering, and man, and like you don't even have to turn on the news. Like there is pain, there is suffering, and it's like with deep skeptically, like, well, where's God in this? And again, while you have me here, I'm going to spoil the ending because I had that experience. I can't answer yours. I can just share with you mine. You know, I had that thought, if there is a God, why? If there is a God, why did I go through some of the things that I went through? If there is a God, why did I experience the things that I experienced in my alcoholism? If there is a God, why did I experience some of the things that I experienced in my sobriety? Some of the most painful moments of my life. Not all of them, because believe me, I had enough of them to bring me here. But some of the most painful moments of my life have happened in my sobriety. If there is a God, why? And I'll tell you what happened for me. As I began to take, again, these steps as a way of life, I took God to that fourth column. You can put God in resentments. Heck yeah, you can. And I began to look at some of those other things that had happened to me. I began to look at those things and I put that in the fourth column. And I began to shift. And I began to see some of them in a different way. And as I shared that with God and another human being, and I've done many fifth steps and I've received many more fifth steps, and I'll talk about that here in a second, I began to feel like I wasn't so alone, that I wasn't alone in my experience. And when I went out to make amends, not even necessarily for some of that stuff, but when I went to make amends, that guilt and that shame began to fall from me. And then it really was when I sat down with another alcoholic, you know, eyeball to eyeball, Zoom screen to Zoom screen. And I would sit down with them. And they would tell me the things that had happened to them. They would tell me the things that they had done. They would tell me their pain and their suffering and their struggles. And I would say, yes, me too. Yes, me too, I have felt like that. Yes, me too, I've done that. Yes, me too, that happened to me. Yes, me too, I went through that. Yes, me too, I drank like that. Yeah, I did that too. And this is how I got freedom from it. That's where God is in it for me. God is in it because I am called to be an agent of God. We're gonna talk about that in a couple weeks whenever we get to that. And I get to bring God's goodness and God's grace into the world. It was Mr. Rogers who said, I believe it was after the JFK assassination, and the kids were scared. And he said, whenever there's something big and scary going on, look for the helpers. You know, and that's where God is. But I'm an adult, barely, and not emotionally. And so my job isn't to look for the helpers. My job is to be the helper. And that's where God's grace is. And so it says, we looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. So that's skeptically. And we can do that in organized religion where people have used religious power to abuse and to hurt others. We can look at even in AA where we see people that, look, that guy's sober that long and he's that big of a jerk. You know what I mean? We can look skeptically at people who claim to be godly. But here's what happens. It says, how could a capital S, capital B, supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? And it's these big theological questions. Now, we talk a lot about, and we'll talk about it the next time we meet, is the God of our understanding. The God of our understanding. And I got a 1930s dictionary. No, I didn't travel with it. And in my 1930s dictionary, the word understand is to know through experience. So I understand this God, not intellectually, but through experience. And here is what opens us up to belief that there could be a power. It says, yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? Have you ever had that moment in the stars, the Milky Way, and it's like, wow. You know, stars actually twinkle. That's why twinkle, twinkle, little star. I didn't get they twinkle. I didn't know that. You know, like your breath taken away by the beauty and the majesty of nature. And it says, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. And what opens us up to the belief that there could be a power greater than ourselves is our own experience. And at minimum, our experience of sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and seeing recovered alcoholics. The light is on in their eye. There is a hope in their spirit. There is a joy that pervades them. They drank the way that I drank. They did what I did. They felt the way that I felt. And man, they are happy, joyous, and free. Maybe this power could work in my life too. And so that we're like 4 minutes to, so I'll wrap us up there, and we'll pick up next week and keep it rolling. So thanks for the opportunity.